Following demands by Nigerians for electoral reforms before 2027 presidential election so that it will guarantee a level playing field for all participants. While that is nice to have, Nigerians must understand that laws have never been our problem. It has always been implementation. Justices having the audacity to rewrite our laws and literally impose candidates against the wishes of the electorate. This is where Professor Odinkalu comes in his new book that soft copies are already out on Amazon. He calls it The Selectorate. In this book, he argues that the problem has always been the judiciary. Also, Professor Odinkalu spoke in an X-Space hosted by Mindset. Here he took a lot of questions. In fact, he had some strong words for Peter Obi and Atiku Abubakar, saying that they are time wasters. They should give way for people that are more serious about taking back this country from the criminal hijack. This might sound demoralizing, but at the end of the interview, towards the end of the video, he makes it clear that he's a very optimistic person, that he's just saying it the way it is, the way he sees it. It is his opinion, by the way, but at the end of the day, if Nigerians follow his recommendations and also plan well ahead, they can take back this country from the criminal hijackers. Let's take a listen.
Everything in life is dangerous, and everyone has got to make their choices as to what kind of danger they can cope with and what kind of danger they cannot cope with. If you are alive, you are old enough to die. So that's I long ago accepted that all of us are mortal and none of us has control over when we die, how we die, unless of course you choose to take your own life. So those things don't worry me now. If people want to threaten me on whatever platform, they're welcome to do so. And this is why I quarrel with both Atiku Abubakar and Peter Obi. And I will continue to say it. I know that I take a lot of abuse for that one too, because for all manner of things. But I'm willing to forgive Atiku fully, or indeed at all, for not going to Rivers State in 2023 to campaign. And Peter Obi, this renegade priest in Benue State, telling him, I cannot guarantee your safety. Who is the priest who cannot guarantee the safety of his own people? And Peter runs away and then starts going to Twitter. I'm sorry, we cannot run a country like that. And we finish an election and we are seeing them all over the country, all over the world. They cannot lead a protest inside Nigeria. Who do they want to die on their behalf? Let Peter Obi come out. Let Atiku come out. Let counter-protesters come out. Didn't Buhari protest? Didn't Tinubu protest? Why can't Atiku come out? Is he too young to die? Or take a bullet? Or take tear gas? Didn't Chuba Kadibo, who is his acolyte, die protesting? They shot him with tear gas. Chuba, who had a respiratory disorder. So all these people who are afraid to take an injury, I'm sorry, I'm not interested in following anybody or supporting anybody now who cannot take an injury for what they believe in. Full stop. So if you don't want to take an injury because you want counter-protest or you're afraid of counter-protest, get out of the way. Let those of us who want to organize to be able to do that, do it. But don't come and tell me to come and support you as Labour Party or PDP or QED. No. People don't know how bad this thing is. How can you declare the kind of state of emergency they declared in Rivers State and no PDP legislator, no Labour Party legislator, no member of the National Assembly of the opposition could tear their shirt and say, no, this is bad? If just one person had torn their shirt that day and said, I will say, okay, I will follow this person. But you take the most formidable state of the opposition party and nobody actually protests. You don't know the significance of protest. How do people know that there is something called Tiananmen Square today? It's because of the power of protest, the power of one man who refused to say, who decided to say no and stood in front of a tanker. Sorry, no, a tank, a military tank. Correct? The tank could have pulverized him, nobody, but the courage of somebody standing in front of a tank overpowers everybody. This is the point about this thing. We don't understand the power we have, all the grammar we are speaking, why do people remember Gani Fawebi? It was because Gani stood as one man against the might of the military. The civic might we have, we refuse to understand. And that is why I'm increasingly very visceral against Atiku and P2P. They are time wasters. They should get the out of the way. I'm sorry. They're bloody wasting the time of citizens. They should stop offering people delusions in the comfort of their homes. Every one of us is an adult. Now, if you're 18, you're an adult. Nobody should stop misleading. People should stop misleading us. I will never support Tinubu. I will never vote for Tinubu, except under one condition. If El Rufai is running against Tinubu, I will vote for Tinubu. But except that, I will never support Tinubu. And yet, recognizing that as it is, I am not willing to support P2B or Atiku under the present circumstances because they are time wasters. They are drain pipes of the emotions of people. And I think they should get out of the way and let us try and fix our problems. Okay? So the issue of judicial capture is serious enough for Nigerian politicians to take to the streets, because that is how a lot of them are losing power, and that is how a lot of them are losing relevance. We've got to get to the point. Now, how did the coup in Mali happen? There was an election during COVID in 2020. The opposition won a significant number of seats, but the ruling party of IBK, who won the majority seats, they were not enough. They were not happy with winning the majority, just as APC was not happy with having won the majority of seats in the country in 2023. So in 2023, APC sent in a squad of judges to go and collect the seats won by PDP in Plateau State. It's not much different from what happened in Mali. How did Mali get military rule? The ruling party decided to collect the seats won by the opposition. Using the Constitutional Court, they collected 31 seats. The opposition had nowhere else to go. They went to the streets and started protesting. Some Islamists joined them. ECOWAS asked President Jonathan to mediate. When President Jonathan started mediating, people told him they wanted the Constitutional Court sacked. He went in, came out, went in, came out. By the time he returned to tell them, okay, I've discussed with the government, we can sack the Constitutional Court, the people said, no, we are tired. We want the whole government sacked. We no longer will be happy with you telling us to sack the Constitutional Court. By the time they were trying to negotiate, okay, let us give you the prime minister, nominate prime minister, the military had moved in and taken over power. When people do not feel that democracy is offering them options, things do happen. Or when people begin to feel that their judges are part of the conspiracy against their will, judges cannot be safe. By contrast, I was involved in the case in Malawi in 2019-2020. President Peter Mutharika, who was the younger brother of President Bingu Mutharika, who had died of a heart attack when in 2012, right? Bingu died in 2012. Now, Peter had been a professor of law in the United States for over 30 years, returned, became foreign minister to his brother, and when his brother died suddenly, Peter exported the dead body of his brother to South Africa and was planning with the military to take over power so that Mrs. Tembo, Joyce Tembo, who was the vice president, would not succeed. The chief of army staff in Malawi refused. And so Tembo became president and Peter kept plotting. He eventually won the presidency the following election. But in 2019, he lost. When he lost, Peter rigged the election, used TPEX to rewrite the results. The Constitutional Court of Malawi struck down what he did and asked them to do a rerun. Peter then went and decided he was going to fire the Supreme Court so that he could bring in justices who would rule in his favor. The people of Malawi went and protected their Supreme Court. They said they trusted the Chief Justice more than they could trust the politicians. They took to the streets. That is how Supreme Court of Malawi was saved. How many people here will go and protest for a Nigerian judge? That's the issue. So people know when their judges are doing right. People also know when their judges are not up to speed. In Kenya today, for what it's worth, there are people asking for David Maraga, the penultimate Chief Justice of Kenya, to come and run for president. Okay? So the people are not stupid. And I think it is important that we understand what we have done in Nigeria is to underestimate the power of citizens. And when people ask, what can we do? Look, in South Africa in 1994, this is not a story I was told. I was in South Africa at the negotiations at Kempton Park. Okay? In 1994 in South Africa, the existing judicial infrastructure and personnel were complicit in apartheid. So a decision was made within the ANC and the legal establishment to turn them over. They enjoyed constitutional tenure, yes, but the ANC decided we could not work with these people. That's how they created the Constitutional Court and relocated the Office of Chief Justice of South Africa from the Supreme Court of Appeal in Bloemfontein to the Constitutional Court in Johannesburg, and made Arthur Chaskalson, who had never been a judge in his life, as the Chief Justice of South Africa. In 2010, Kenya fired its entire judiciary. All of them were fired. They hired for a new Chief Justice. The man who got it was Dr. Willie Mutunga. Willie was a political detainee. Willie had been a lecturer. Willie was an NGO worker. At the time he became Chief Justice, he was the regional representative of Ford Foundation in East Africa, working out of Nairobi. And he became Kenya's Chief Justice in 2010. He had never before held judicial office in his life. So all this talk about what can we do, there is a lot we can do, and we don't even need to go this far. The NJC has now said, okay, we are going to begin to advertise appointments so that we know who is being appointed. But they don't have a system for managing it. And my suspicion is they have said it because they would like to see people say, oh, we are doing something, when they're still doing the same things they are doing. If we want to change and reform, I've outlined a few very modest proposals in the book for those who eventually get to read it, and I'll probably advertise those or have them published separately so that everyone has access to them and we can begin to discuss the ideas. But there are lots of things that we can do that do not implicate any need to amend the Constitution. We are not as powerless as we think, but not if the Chief Justices are going to continue to be complicit in a process of judicial capture. The US Supreme Court was invited in Bush v. Gore in 2000 to write itself into election decision making. It said no. It actually said that courts should be careful about protecting the design. If you read that judgment, that judges should be careful about protecting the design of the US Constitution, that sovereignty belongs to the people. The Indian Supreme Court has looked at that same issue and taken exactly the same position, that courts should not be the people deciding who wins or loses elections and computing votes and declaring numbers. What courts should do is preserve the framework of rules with reference to which such decisions are taken. And if you go back to read the Babalaki Commission report, which investigated the FEDECO and submitted its report in 1986 based on the 1983 elections, you may know that Babalaki in that report explicitly said that if a court invalidates an election, it should send it back to the people for them to decide. Go back to Onohan INEC. Aniagolu said exactly the same thing, Justice Aniagolu. If you go to Uwais panel report in 2008, they said almost exactly the same thing, that the decision as to who becomes winner of an election should not be computed by judges. That, I think, is the underlying issue here. That once judges begin to be the people, and you're right in referencing Jonathan's assumption, he also makes that point in his more recent book, Law in a Time of Crisis. They are looking at, in which he looks at the role of the law in the context of COVID. And he says, no, the law should go so far and no farther, right? Now, if we contrast that with what our judges are doing in Nigeria, the overreach is beyond the call of duty. And this is really about returning the judiciary to what the judiciary should be doing, which is what? Addressing the cases that involve ordinary citizens, not being fully immersed in calling the winners and losers of elections and making money off of that directly. As we speak, if the Indian judiciary is experiencing a small crisis, why? There was a fire in the house of a judge, and the fire service went there. As they were evacuating, they found a lot of money in the house of the judge. They reported that in their documentation, and the Chief Justice of India requires the judge to resign because there was no way to explain the quantity of money that was found in his office. The judge has refused, and the Chief Justice of India has taken that to the President of India to require the judge to resign. Okay? In 2016, I have the report of the SSS. The amount of money that was found in the house of Justice Ngota, for instance, there's no way you can legitimately explain that amount of money. He is gone, and may God do his thing, and may God grant his soul mercy. But as a fact, there is no way Ngota could have been an upright judge with that amount of money, with what was recorded as having been found in his house. I have the full report of everything that was found in every justice who was raided on that day. Do I think the SSS acted properly in the way they did it? No. But should they have had those amounts of money in their houses? Absolutely damn no. So this is the point. When judges are that crooked and have converted their houses into bureau de change, where you can collect Deutschmark and euros and this one, there's a problem. Having said everything I've said here, I've also told people that I'm a very optimistic person. And if you come out of this depressed, then you haven't got my message. And I can tell you my own story, okay? Because I've been at this thing a long time. I made a choice as a young person that this was what I was going to do. And heck, as I said, I graduated at the top of my set in the Nigerian law school. I finished university with the top prizes, and I finished the law school with top prizes. I also have a PhD in law. So I'm not idle. But this is a choice I made. And when I made this choice, I was clear it wasn't going to be easy. I've been at this. In my generation, we wrestled military rule. In 1993, while Abacha was beginning his presidential tenure, my friend Tunde Fagbonlu, senior advocate of Nigeria, for those who know Alukanda Oyebode, the law firm, Tunde is the senior litigation partner in Alukanda Oyebode. Tunde and I drafted the FOI bill. At that time, the military were still in power. We had no hope in hell of getting that bill into law, okay? That bill that we drafted in 1993 became the FOI Act in 2011 with modest adaptations. All right? Now, it didn't end there. I could tell you a lot of stories about all manner of situations from different parts of Africa, because I've had the privilege of working in different parts of Africa, different countries on litigation and a lot of other things. In 1997, I represented a man who was stateless in Botswana. We finally managed to get him a passport, but before he died, he told me, please work hard and make sure that this thing that has happened to me does not happen to anyone else. In 2007, in his memory, I prepared a draft treaty on statelessness in Africa. That text I prepared in 2007 became adopted by African Union as a convention last year in 2024. What am I saying here? When you start some of these things, you don't know how far they are going to go. So the idea of giving up should not be in our lingo as long as we are alive, and particularly if you're young. The fact that Tinubu is dominant today does not mean he's always going to be dominant. Anyone who was around in 2003 would not believe now that by 2025, PDP is about to be finished, because the hubris of PDP then was overwhelming. So it's the same thing here. Nobody should feel demobilized just because of what is happening here. Even in this particular context that we are, I have a lot of stories of victory to tell every day in that Nigeria. Not just in judiciary, in policing, in reform, and even in this particular government now. So people, please, if anybody is feeling depressed, I'm not one of them. I'm very optimistic about our own prospects and the possibilities. But what I am against, what I'm trying to suggest to you is, once you're adult, please do your own reasoning. Don't be anybody's groupie. Hold everybody to account. And try and be realistic in your idealism. That's all I'm saying. Depression is not part of the equation for me here. The only thing I see here is grounds for more work and grounds for more optimism, and grounds to be a lot more ruthless in the way we conceptualize our possibilities. I hope I'm clear enough.